Every single time that I tune into an AEW pay per view event, I go in knowing exactly what to expect, while at the same time knowing how I already feel about AEW as a promotion. My expectations for any AEW show, in a way, is marred by my feelings on the nature surrounding AEW, from their cult like loyalist fans that are stuck in their rival WWE promotion is actually better phase, to the people that run AEW itself, whom of which influenced that behavior since day one. See any being the elite skit that takes unfunny, lowball pot shots at WWE, or Cody smashing Triple H's throne on one of their first pay per view events, or Cody saying that AEW is the Ellis Island of pro wrestling in one of his promos. Quite frankly, I just find AEW to be one of the most repulsive takes on pro wrestling that I've ever seen to date, given that this was the pro wrestling renaissance that I and so many people were hoping for. Tony Khan is a fucking walking embarrassment of a promoter who seems to be more obsessed with his show being eligible for Dave Meltzer's Show of the Year and getting in a fight on Twitter with people that had the audacity to criticize him or his show. Through him and the elite as the ones that are running the shit show, AEW becomes insufferable television to sit through. And yet, the stubborn wrestling fan in me sits through it anyway, in the same way that a lot of those fuck the Fed type fans sit through WWE shows despite saying that they loathe it as much as they do, the only difference being that I'm not on anybody's side, so to speak. Now, these days, I skip Raw and Dynamite altogether, just because I can't stomach the weekly digest like I used to, and I don't have a good reason or purpose for watching those shows at the moment. Lately, I've chosen to stick to the bigger pay-per-views. As far as AEW pay-per-view events have gone thus far, I'd say that they rival WWE's pay-per-view events at their worst. And at this point, I'd say that AEW's pay-per-views are a lot worse than WWE's. Say what you will about WWE for the quality of show that they put together, but at least these days they're kind of forced to cater to wrestling fans more than the casual ones that tune into WWE and nothing else, because those casual fans have been leaving in droves for years now. Don't get me wrong, the shows are still bad, but they're not outright ignoring wrestling fans like they used to. Through WWE, we have NXT now, a show that's primarily dedicating focus to the wrestling more than the entertainment. NXT is the only show that I feel the need to tune into every week, because everything that happens on NXT matters. I've touched on it before, but in NXT, even smaller feuds are imperative to the growth of the wrestlers, which is something that we hardly get with Monday Night Raw's overall lack of focus and SmackDown's inconsistency from anything apart from Roman Reigns in some way. AEW was the promotion that I had hoped for back in 2015, when I would watch Raw with my buddies and we talk about how one day a new promotion was going to rise up out of the ground and give WWE a run for their money. Little did I know that the worst parts of New Japan and Ring of Honor back in 2017 would cultivate that new promotion. I could go on and on about everything that I couldn't fucking stand about the Elite back then. Just thinking about the time when Cody was feuding with Juice Robinson back in New Japan over the United States Championship, and Cody thinking that calling Juice Robinson a bad impression of Kairi Sane was a burn on him in some way. And hey, what the fuck do I know anyways, because a lot of the fans back then, those saying being the Elite fans, thought that line was fucking great. Probably because referencing Kairi Sane, a WWE wrestler, was super edgy. And look, on some level I get it. When I was 13, I thought that the Voodoo Kin Mafia calling out DX back in 2006 made TNA look super edgy because WWE would never. But now I just look back on that segment and it makes me cringe, like a lot of things that I thought were cool when I was 13. And so, at a ripe 22 years old, I'm looking at this new edgy WWE rival promotion in AEW, like fuck, I might be too old for this shit. It's honestly a better take from me than listing off everything that I can't stand about AEW's sense of humor, because mocking WWE for how they make their wrestlers watch the TV in the back is so funny. So this leaves me at a bit of an impasse. Why do I still watch AEW, even if just for the bigger shows? Good fucking question. It's because, much like WWE, I still have faith that AEW can put on a good show. But now it's getting to the point where every fucking pay-per-view that they put out is chipping away at that faith more and more. And I don't know how many more AEW pay-per-view events that I have left in me to sit through. AEW's best pay-per-view event was probably their first Full Gear show back in 2019. At least that show was okay, even if it wasn't good or great. The majority of their shows over the years were either outright bad or, like Double or Nothing 2021, fucking trash. And look, I tried being nice to the show. I really did. It was going good with Hangman Page versus Brian Cage in the opening match. And even for as cringy as I find Jon Moxley and the Young Bucks, I was willing to look past that if the match turned out okay. And I thought the match turned out great. Match of the night without question. The Casino Battle Royal was pretty mid, or Battle Royale, I should say. I'm not crazy about Jungle Boy, but I see the appeal, and Christian Cage is my fucking guy, so whenever he's wrestling, I'm usually watching these days. What killed the show dead for me, and maybe some of you AEW fans can see eye to eye with me on this one, at the very least, if you didn't find anything else I've said about the company relatable in any way, Cody Rhodes versus Anthony Ogogo. I had hoped before the pay-per-view that Cody versus Ogogo wouldn't be what killed the show dead as dead can be. Every sign indicated that we were headed in that direction, with the gross amount of nationalism before the match even started. But even with the AEW Tag Team title match and how I felt about the wrestlers and the storyline, I was more than willing to look past it. Cody somehow subverted my expectation of him sucking by finding a whole new different way to suck. I expected this gross nationalism to be the whole match the entire way through, and I had hoped going in that the match wouldn't be that. But oh boy, did this motherfucker find a way to put on a dud of a match. This dude really went out there and had a dark elevation match on pay-per-view dressed up in his political beliefs, all the while flexing the shit out of his privilege. Like, this dude always finds a way. This fucking guy had a promo hyping this shit up, talking about how America's empathy outweighs their hatred. Like, how privileged do you have to be so fucking tone deaf to truly and honestly believe that shit in the first place? Like, this man's ego is so astounding to me. Who the fuck let this man get away with being that full of his own shit? He might legitimately be worse than Jeff Jarrett. I was hopeful. I was with the show as it was going on. And this motherfucker really came in, took a dump in the ring, and bounced. This is the first full capacity crowd after the pandemic hit, and still the crowd fucking died for a good minute after this shit. I can't. The masochistic wrestling fan in me wants to know what this fucking guy is gonna pull next, but the sensible human being in me wants to stop watching this shit completely. And I'm telling you, all it takes is one dud to kill a whole show. The TNT Championship match that followed between Miro and Lance Archer was worthless. Hikaru Shida versus Britt Baker for the AEW Women's Championship was completely worth missing as well. And no, I don't give a fuck about Britt winning the championship. Her winning was just as predictable to me as any time Roman Reigns had a match where you knew that this dude wasn't losing. Shida was mediocre the whole way through as champion, and that's not even to say that I don't like her as a wrestler. One of the best matches of the year was her tag team match in the Women's Eliminator Tournament with the Gato Move girls. Like Miro, Lance Archer, or any other wrestler that came from a different promotion before AEW, Shida just doesn't translate well in the company. As far as Britt Baker goes, it's a credit to her that she has the ability to pull out a quality match despite looking like she perpetually does not give a fuck about what she's doing in the ring. Don't get me wrong, I thought that her unsanctioned match with Thunder Rosa was great. But even in that match, it was almost all smoke and mirrors, and Britt herself didn't look like she was doing anything other than trying to remember her spots and briskly walking into the next sequence with Rosa. I can't even tell if she's really trying. After all that, though, the show looked like it was starting to pick back up again with the Sting match, which was all it really was. Darby, Ethan, and Scorpio were unremarkable at best. And it's just funny to see the aftermath of Scorpio winning the brass ring, more fuck the Fed bullshit, and seeing it amount to absolutely nothing. The guy's a heel now and he says bitch on TV just like anybody else in wrestling. Okay, great, that's it. What was the point of the brass ring match anyways if it was going to amount to absolutely nothing? Like this is supposed to be the brass ring that everybody's complaining about not being able to grab in WWE? Because if so, then every wrestler in WWE is a fucking moron, I guess. Who knew that grabbing the brass ring would really amount to a relevancy? A first class ticket straight into a relevancy. Usually I'd like to see them prove me wrong, but it's fucking Scorpio Sky, so what good would that do? Who cares? Maybe the next person that grabs the brass ring can defend it on Dark. The triple threat match for the AEW World Championship between Kenny Omega, Pac, and Orange Cassidy was predictable, so I was hoping that the match would surpass my expectations. But unfortunately, on this show, I'm not even sure that it stood a chance. We were already 3 hours into a pay-per-view that didn't even need to be 4 hours in the first place? What the fuck happened to everything that the EVPs of this promotion promised about their pay-per-view events not running long because we don't want to be like the other guys and waste your time, herder? Dude, fucking Jim Ross was gassed in the first 5 minutes of the show, and I had to listen to that man progressively get worse for another 3.5 hours. The commentary in AEW, just in general, can fall flat on his face worse than WWE's commentary team, even with the likes of Corey Graves and Byron Saxton just amounting to nothing but shouting and rambling, because at least they're not part of a company in WWE that's constantly telling me how much they're better than the competition. AEW will always have that aura around them that they built for themselves. And man, does it run their shit so much further into the ground. The triple threat match was about as bad as Roman Reigns versus Jinder Mahal at Money in the Bank in 2018. The story was predictable, disinteresting, and didn't work for me at all whatsoever. I didn't care about Don Callis doing a run-in and getting involved at the end of the match because of fucking course that would happen. I didn't buy into any near fall for Orange Cassidy or Pac because of fucking course they weren't winning. And I didn't buy into the match itself because the wrestling was only ever feeding into a crowd that wants to like this shit so fucking bad, no matter what it is. So why the hell would the wrestlers even feel the need to try and tell a compelling story when the crowd have already made it so easy for them? All they have to do is just go in the ring and not be WWE. The stadium stampede sucked the whole way through and ended with a disappointing finish, not unlike Cody versus a Go-Go match from earlier on the show. It was corny, middle fingers are edgy, guys. The Inner Circle's entrance didn't look anywhere close to as good as to what it probably thought it looked like in their heads. And who the fuck is the waterhead that thought that closing the show with a cinematic match would be a good idea? But again, what do I know, right? The crowd ate it up just like they ate up everything else on the show. Doesn't matter if I think the show is trash because it's absolutely flawless to them. The only criticism that they'll ever have for AEW is, hey, does anybody else think that AEW is so good that it ruined everything else for them in wrestling? Because AEW not being WWE automatically makes them better than WWE, I guess. Even though I didn't want it to be, AEW Double or Nothing 2021 turned out to be no different from just about any other AEW show that I watch these days. For me, watching AEW is like listening to Death to Mumble Rap or listening to any Eminem album that he's dropped recently, where all he does is complain about critics not liking his new shit. There will always be stans that refuse to acknowledge criticism, and when that stems from the creator themselves, i.e. Eminem choosing to lash out at articles as a 47-year-old man and refusing to, I don't know, accept that not everything he put out is above that shit and act his own fucking age for once, the fans will always follow along with what he says, as is the way of any stan. AEW is the equivalent of any Twitter account with a Sasha Banks avatar attacking someone because they said that Sasha Banks was just okay, because how dare they say that she's imperfect. AEW itself is run by these kinds of people. Just look at how thin-skinned Tony Schiavone is against people criticizing anything AEW related. Or just look at how Chris Jericho conducts himself on Twitter these days. It's fucking embarrassing. I'm not sure that AEW can ever put on a show that isn't up its own ass. And honestly, that's just my perspective when I watch this shit. I know some people that like AEW and they don't see it in the same light as me, which, hey, I'm glad that the wrestling renaissance is going well for you if it is. In parts, I can even see the appeal. Again, I thought the first 2 matches on the show were exceptional. For me, though, I've already gone into detail as to why that I feel AEW as a promotion is not exceptional. AEW Double or Nothing 2021 was trash.